have hiked most of my life in California, long enough to know that the land here looks friendly until it suddenly isn't. The trails are clean, the signs are neat, and the weather usually feels forgiving. That illusion is what gets people hurt. I learned that the hard way on a coastal hike that started like any other weekend escape and ended with my body reminding me how fast things can turn when land and water meet. The trail ran along a stretch of rugged coastline, one of those places where steep cliffs fall straight into the Pacific. The path stayed high for most of the hike, winding through dry grass, low scrub, and scattered eucalyptus trees that smelled sharp and clean in the morning air. The ocean was always there, sometimes visible, sometimes hidden, but always loud. The waves hit the shore with a deep, hollow sound that you could feel in your chest if you stopped moving long enough. I started early, alone, which was normal for me. The sky was clear but pale, the sun still low enough that it didn't offer much warmth. I wore layers and carried water, snacks, and a light pack. Nothing about the day felt risky. The trail was familiar, marked, and busy enough that I expected to pass people later in the morning. First, I did. A few hikers moved past me, heading inland, while I stayed on the coastal route. As the hours passed, the trail narrowed and dipped lower. The land changed. The cliffs became sharper, the drop-off steeper. The ocean felt closer, louder, more aggressive. The waves were bigger than usual, long and powerful, rolling in heavy sets. The tide was rising, though I did not give it enough thought at the time. I had seen this ocean my whole life. I thought I understood it. The trail eventually led down toward the beach through a narrow cut in the cliff. It was steep, loose with sand and gravel, but manageable. When I reached the bottom, the beach surprised me. It was much steeper than it looked from above. The sand sloped sharply toward the water, and the waves rushed far up the shore before sliding back down. There was no flat area, no wide stretch of safe-looking sand. Felt exposed. I stayed near the base of the cliff and walked along the beach, planning to reconnect with the trail farther down. The sound of the ocean was overwhelming now, drowning out everything else. The wind came off the water cold and wet, carrying salt that stuck to my lips and skin. The waves moved in steady sets, each one strong enough to pull sand out from under my feet if I stepped too close. I knew about rip currents. Everyone who grows up around the Pacific knows about them. We hear about them on the news. We learn about them in school. We tell ourselves we would recognize one if we saw it. But knowing something and understanding it with your body are not the same thing. I walked too close to the water without meaning to. One wave came in stronger than the others, rushing higher up the steep sand. It hit my legs hard and knocked me off balance. Before I could step back, the water pulled out again, fast and heavy, dragging my feet downhill. The sand vanished beneath me, and I fell sideways. The next wave hit before I could get up. Cold water slammed into my chest and shoulders, stealing my breath. I tried to stand, but the slope worked against me. Each wave pulled me lower, toward deeper water, while the next one knocked me flat again. The rip current grabbed hold, a strong sideways pull that felt like being caught on a moving belt. My pack made everything worse. It filled with water and dragged me down. My boots filled instantly, heavy and useless. I tried to crawl, then tried to stand, but the force of the water kept twisting me sideways. The waves did not let up. They came in steady, punishing rhythm, each one resetting any progress I made. Panic crept in fast. My chest burned from the cold and the effort. Salt water filled my mouth and nose. My body remembered something older than thought, a deep fear that screamed that this was how people disappear. I forced myself to stop fighting straight toward shore. I remembered barely that riptides pull out and sideways, not down. Fighting them head-on only wastes strength. I let the water take me sideways just a little, using the waves instead of fighting them. Felt wrong. Every part of me wanted to claw my way straight up the beach. But my legs were shaking, and my arms felt weak. I focused on breathing when I could, turning my head to avoid swallowing water. The cold sank deep into my muscles, making everything slower. After what felt like forever, the pull eased just enough. I caught a break between waves and managed to roll onto my knees. Another wave hit, But this time it didn't drag me as far. I crawled, then stumbled, then crawled again, hands digging into wet sand that slid away beneath my fingers. When I finally reached a spot where the waves barely touched my boots, I collapsed. I lay there for a long time, shaking hard. My lungs hurt, my hands were numb, my whole body felt wrong, like it didn't belong to me anymore. The ocean kept moving, completely indifferent. The same waves that nearly pulled me out were still crashing in, strong and steady, as if nothing had happened. I dragged myself farther up the beach and sat with my back against the cliff. My pack was soaked. My phone was dead. My legs cramped every time I moved. I realized then how trapped I really was. The tide had risen while I struggled in the water, and the beach was narrower now. The waves reached higher up the sand, cutting off the path I had walked in on. The only way out was back up the cliff trail. Standing up was harder than it should have been. My muscles felt weak and unsteady, and my balance was off. The cold clung to me, even in the sun. I started up the narrow path, moving slow and careful, forcing myself to focus on each step. A slip here would mean a long fall onto rocks or straight back into the surf. As I climbed, my body kept replaying the moment the water took me. My heart would suddenly race, my breath catching for no reason. I could still feel the pull on my legs, the way the sand disappeared beneath me. The memory was not just in my head. It was in my muscles, my skin, my lungs. When I reached the top, I did not feel relief right away. I sat on the ground and stared out at the ocean. From above, it looked almost calm, beautiful even. The rip current that grabbed me was invisible from that height. Nothing marked it. Nothing warned me. I hiked back the way I came, slower now, more aware of everything. The trail felt narrower. The cliffs felt higher. Every sound of water made my shoulders tense. By the time I reached my car, I was exhausted in a way that sleep would not fix. That experience did not fade with time. Even now, years later, my body remembers. I feel it when I hike near steep beaches, when the sand slopes too sharply, when the waves sound heavier than they should. The fear comes back without asking, tight and sudden. I understand now why people say the ocean teaches lessons you never forget. I survived because I had just enough knowledge, just enough luck, and just enough strength left when I needed it. Many people don't get all three. The Pacific does not need storms or monsters to be deadly. It only needs a moment of overconfidence and a slope that looks harmless until it isn't. I went hiking alone because I needed quiet more than I needed safety. That was the honest reason. I picked a trail that looked boring on the map, a long loop in a state forest that almost no one talked about. It was late fall, the kind of season where the trees are mostly bare and the ground is covered in wet leaves that hide rocks and roots. The air was cold but not sharp, just heavy and damp. I parked my car at a small gravel lot with no other cars, which I told myself was peaceful and not a warning. The trailhead sign was old and faded. Parts of the map were scratched out or peeling. I took a picture of it with my phone and started walking. The forest swallowed sound fast. After a few minutes, even the road noise was gone. My boots made a soft crunch with every step, and the smell of wet dirt and dead leaves stayed in my nose. I remember thinking how alone it felt. Not in a bad way at first, just quiet in a deep way. The trail started wide and easy, then slowly narrowed. Fallen branches lay across it like ribs. The ground dipped and rose, never flat for long. I kept checking my watch and my phone. Even though there was no signal, time felt strange, stretched out. The sky was gray, not dark, but not bright either. The kind of sky that makes everything look the same color. About an hour in, I noticed footprints that were not mine. They were boot prints, similar size, pressed deep into the mud where the trail dipped near a small stream. That did not scare me right away. It was a public trail after all. But the prints were sharp, not softened by time, and they went in the same direction I was going. I told myself they were fresh because someone had walked earlier that morning. Still, I became more aware of my surroundings after that. The forest felt tighter as I went on. Trees grew closer together, and the trail twisted more. Sometimes it disappeared under leaves, and I had to stop and look for the next marker. Red paint on trees showed the way, but some of the marks were faded or hidden behind branches. Each time I stopped, the silence felt heavier. No birds, no wind, just my breathing and my steps. I started to feel watched, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, steady way, like pressure. I would turn around and see nothing but trees. The kind of trees that all look the same until you realize you cannot tell one from another. I picked up my pace without really deciding to. Another stretch of mud showed more footprints. This time they were closer together, as if the person had slowed down there. I noticed the toe marks pointed slightly outward, which felt like a detail I should not have been paying attention to. I told myself to stop overthinking. Still, my chest felt tight. The trail climbed a long ridge. My legs burned and my breath came out in white clouds. At the top, there was a small clearing where the trees opened just enough to show the slope falling away on both sides. I stopped there to drink water. My hands were shaking more than they should have been from the cold. While I stood there, I heard something behind me, not a clear sound, more like a shift, leaves settling, weight moving. I turned fast. Nothing. No movement. Just trees and the narrow path I had come from. I stood still for a long time, listening. My ears rang with the effort. Eventually, I convinced myself it was an animal or just my nerves. I kept walking. The trail began to descend, and that was when things started to feel wrong in a way I could not explain. The footprints kept appearing, then disappearing, then appearing again. Always ahead of me, never crossing the trail, never turning off. I realized that whoever made them had my same pace. When I slowed down, the prints were closer together. When I walked faster, they stretched out. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. The battery was already lower than I liked. I had not told anyone exactly where I was going. That thought sat in my head like a weight. The forest floor grew darker as the trail dropped into a low area. The air smelled stagnant, like old water. The ground was soft, almost spongy. My boots sank slightly with every step. I slipped once and caught myself on a tree, bark scraping my palm. The pain felt sharp and real, grounding me in a way I did not enjoy. That was when I noticed the sound of steps that were not mine. Very faint, but there. Not every step, just sometimes. Always after I moved. Always stopping when I stopped. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I did not run. I knew better than that. I kept walking, pretending nothing was wrong. Every nerve in my body stretched tight. The trail curved sharply to the left around a cluster of rocks. When I rounded it, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A section of the trail ahead was blocked by a fallen tree, thick and low. The kind you cannot easily climb over without stopping and using your hands. I stopped several yards back and listened. There was movement behind me now, closer than before. Leaves shifting, weight pressing down. Not rushed, not panicked. Slow and steady. My mouth went dry. I realized then that this was not an accident of timing or coincidence. Someone had been following me for a long time. I stepped off the trail to the right, moving through brush and low branches. Thorns scratched my arms and snagged my jacket. I moved quietly, crouching low, using trees for cover. My lungs burned as I tried to breathe without sound. I did not look back. I did not want to know what I might see. The forest off the trail was harder to move through. Fallen logs, tangled roots, uneven ground. I slipped more than once, each time freezing afterward, listening. The sounds behind me changed direction. That told me everything I needed to know. I kept moving downhill, not caring where I was going as long as it was not the trail. My legs felt heavy, slow. My foot caught on a root and I fell hard, knocking the air out of me. For a few seconds, I could not breathe. I lay there, face pressed into cold leaves, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. I got up and forced myself to keep going. After what felt like hours, the ground leveled out and I heard water. A river, not the small stream from earlier. The sound was steady and loud enough to cover my movement. I followed it until I saw the water through the trees, wide and fast-moving. On the far side, I could see a road. Just a thin strip of gray, but real. Getting to the riverbank took everything I had left. The rocks were slick, the slope steep. I slid part of the way, scraping my legs and hands. I did not care. I reached the edge and did not stop. The water was freezing, stealing my breath, but I waded in, then swam, fighting the current with weak strokes. Halfway across, I thought I would not make it. My arms felt like they were tearing. I reached the far bank and crawled out, coughing and shaking so hard I could barely stand. I did not look back. I ran toward the road, slipping and stumbling, until I reached it and stood there in the open, water dripping from my clothes onto the pavement. A truck passed a minute later. The driver slowed when they saw me standing there soaked and bleeding. I flagged it down with both arms, not caring how I looked. Later, wrapped in blankets and sitting in the back of an ambulance, I thought about how close the forest still felt, how quiet danger can be, how it does not announce itself. It just follows, patient and calm, waiting for you to make a mistake. I never found out who followed me that day. There was no clear answer, no neat explanation. The forest kept its secret. What I know is simple and clear. I walked into the woods alone, thinking silence was safe. I walked out understanding that quiet can hide intent, and that survival sometimes comes down to noticing small details and refusing to ignore them. I do not hike alone anymore. I do not need to learn that lesson twice. I planned the hike as a way to clear my head. Nothing extreme, nothing heroic. Just a long solo walk through a state forest I had never been to before, a place with wide trails and rolling hills, the kind of place people stop talking about because nothing exciting ever happens there. That was part of why I chose it. I wanted quiet. I wanted to be tired in a clean, honest way. The morning started normal. I woke up early, drove a little over 2 hours, and parked at a small gravel lot beside a rusted metal gate. The trail sign was old and sun-bleached, the letters carved deep enough that they were still readable. No warning signs, no notices, just distances and arrows. The air was cool and damp, and the forest smelled like leaves that had been sitting wet for days. I tightened my boots, adjusted my pack, and stepped onto the trail. First, the hike felt easy and calm. The path was wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side, packed dirt with small stones pressed into it. Tall trees lined both sides, mostly oak and pine, their branches reaching across the trail like loose arches. Sunlight came through in thin strips, lighting up patches of moss and fallen leaves. I could hear birds moving somewhere high up, and the sound of my boots crunching the ground stayed steady and familiar. I walked for hours without anything feeling wrong. I passed old wooden bridges over shallow creeks, stepped around fallen branches, and followed trail markers nailed to trees. I stopped once to drink water and stretch my legs. Everything felt normal enough that I stopped paying close attention, and that was the mistake. Sometime after midday, the trail narrowed. It wasn't sudden. It just slowly became less clear. Grass grew taller along the edges. The dirt showed fewer footprints. I noticed it, but I kept going, thinking the trail would open up again. The map I had showed a loop that circled back toward the main path. I trusted it. The forest changed as I moved deeper. The trees grew closer together, blocking out more light. The air felt heavier, like it had nowhere to move. The bird sounds faded until I couldn't remember when I had last heard one. Even my footsteps sounded duller, like the ground was swallowing the noise. I started to notice small things that didn't sit right. Broken branches that didn't look old. Deep boot prints in muddy patches that didn't match mine. Not fresh enough to be new, but not old either. I told myself other hikers used this trail. That was the whole point of a state forest. Still, I felt my shoulders tense without realizing it. The trail split without warning. No sign, no marker, just 2 narrow paths leading in different directions. Both looked used. Both disappeared quickly into thick trees. I checked my map, turning it slowly, trying to match the land around me. Nothing lined up clearly. The terrain felt wrong, like the map was lying or outdated. I chose the left path because it looked slightly more open. That path dropped downhill fast. The ground turned rocky and uneven. I had to watch every step to keep from twisting an ankle. The air grew colder, and the light dimmed even more. I realized then that I had been walking longer than planned. I checked the time and felt a small knot of worry form in my stomach. I should have been heading back already. I turned around to retrace my steps, but the path behind me didn't look the same. The turn I remembered didn't stand out anymore. Everything blended together. Trees, rocks, shadows. I walked back uphill, trying to stay calm, but the forest felt tighter now, like it was closing in. That was when I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, something sour and sharp, not like rot, but not clean either. Came and went as I walked, carried by pockets of air. I couldn't place it, and that made it worse. I stopped and listened. The forest was silent again. Too silent. No wind in the leaves. No insects. Just the sound of my own breathing, louder than it should have been. I stood there longer than I meant to, my eyes scanning the trees, the spaces between them, the ground at my feet. Then I heard movement, slow and careful, not rushing, not heavy, leaves shifting somewhere behind me. I turned, expecting to see a deer or maybe nothing at all. There was nothing I could see, but the feeling of being watched settled deep in my chest. I started walking faster, not running, but moving with purpose. I stayed on what I hoped was the trail, pushing past low branches, stepping over roots. The light began to fade, turning the forest gray and flat. Shadows stretched in ways that made distances hard to judge. I found something that stopped me cold. A small pile of items laid out beside the trail. A crushed plastic bottle, torn fabric, a shoe, just one. Old, dirty, but not ancient. It sat there like it had been placed on purpose. I stood over it, my heart pounding, trying to understand what I was looking at. People didn't just leave things like that. I backed away slowly and changed direction, moving uphill again, choosing higher ground without really thinking about why. The smell came back stronger. The sound of movement followed, never close, never far, always just enough to be sure it was real. As the last light drained from the sky, panic started to creep in. I knew I wasn't making it out before dark. I knew I was lost. I found a small clearing near a cluster of rocks and decided to stay put. Moving blind felt worse than waiting. Night came fast. The forest turned into a mass of black shapes and narrow gaps. Every sound felt magnified. Twigs snapped. Leaves shifted. Something moved more than once around the edge of the clearing. I couldn't see it, but I knew it wasn't small. The smell hung in the air, thick and close. I didn't sleep. I stayed curled against the rocks, my body stiff, my mind racing through every possible outcome. The movement came and went, sometimes close enough that I felt vibrations through the ground, sometimes farther away, like it was circling. When morning finally came, it felt unreal. Gray light filtered through the trees, thin but steady. The sounds returned slowly. Birds, wind, the smell faded. Whatever had been there was gone. I didn't waste time. I moved carefully but steadily, following the slope downhill until I found a wider trail. It took hours, but eventually I saw a familiar sign, then the edge of the parking lot. My car was still there, alone, exactly where I left it. I sat inside with the doors locked for a long time before driving away. Later, I reported what I found to park services. Weeks after that, I learned another hiker had gone missing in the same area months earlier. They never found him. I still hike, but I don't go off unfamiliar trails anymore. I don't trust quiet the way I used to, and I don't ignore the feeling that tells me when it's time to turn back. I chose the trail on a whim, scrolling through old hiking forums late at night and stopping on one that barely had any photos. People said it was quiet, overgrown, and long. That sounded perfect. I was tired of crowded trails and loud people. I wanted to feel small for a while. I wanted the kind of tired that comes from walking all day and sleeping hard afterward. I packed more than I thought I needed, told myself I was being smart, and left before sunrise. The parking area was nothing more than a dirt pull-off with a rusted gate pushed to one side. There were no other cars. The trailhead sign leaned forward, its post soft and cracked at the base. The map was scratched up, carved into with a knife in places, as if someone had gotten bored or angry standing there for too long. I took a picture of it anyway and started walking. The forest was dense right away. Tall trees with thin trunks, branches tangled high above, blocking most of the sky. The ground was uneven and damp. Leaves stuck to my boots. The air smelled like wet bark and cold soil. It was quiet in a way that felt normal at first. Just my footsteps, my breathing, the soft sound of gear shifting in my pack. The trail was narrow but visible, a faint dirt line cutting through undergrowth. Red trail markers were painted on trees every so often, though many were faded or half covered by moss. I kept a steady pace, settling into the rhythm of walking. After an hour, the forest looked exactly the same in every direction. If I turned around, I could not tell where I had come from. That should have bothered me more than it did. As the sun rose higher, light filtered down in weak patches. I stopped to drink water and eat a snack. My phone showed no signal. I did not expect any, but I still checked. I kept moving. The trail began to climb. Not steep, but long and constant. My legs warmed up, sweat forming under my jacket even though the air stayed cold. My breathing grew louder in my ears. Every now and then, I thought I heard something behind me. Not footsteps exactly, more like the sound of someone moving through brush. Each time I stopped, the sound stopped too. I told myself it was an animal matching my movement without meaning to. About halfway up the climb, I noticed the first real sign that something was wrong. The trail marker ahead of me was scratched through. The red paint scraped away until only bare wood showed. Another marker farther on had been hit too. Not weathered, deliberate. I slowed down and scanned the area. The forest looked empty. Still, I kept walking, but the calm I had earlier was gone. At the top of the ridge, the trail flattened out and followed a narrow spine of land. On either side, the ground dropped sharply, thick with trees and brush. Wind moved through the branches up here, making a low, steady sound that felt like breathing. I stayed on the trail, careful with my footing. One bad step would send me sliding a long way down. I found footprints in the dirt, boot prints deep and clear. They were not fresh enough to be wet, but not old either. They followed the trail exactly same direction as me. That alone was not strange, but they never crossed paths with mine. No sign of passing, no sign of turning around. Just a steady line ahead of me. My stomach tightened. The ridge went on longer than I expected. My legs started to ache. The light shifted, clouds rolling in, muting everything to gray. I checked my watch and realized I had been walking for hours longer than planned. The map showed a junction ahead where the trail looped back toward the parking area. I looked forward to it like a promise. When I reached the junction, the signpost was there, but the signs were gone. The metal brackets hung empty. The ground around it was torn up, footprints circling, overlapping, as if someone had paced there for a long time. The trails themselves looked identical, both narrow, both fading quickly into trees. I pulled out my phone and compared it to the photo of the map. The angles did not match. Either the map was wrong or the trails had shifted over time. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to decide. I chose the path that seemed to descend. Down felt like the right direction. Gravity usually leads somewhere. The descent was rough. The trail dropped fast, switchbacks tight and eroded. Loose dirt slid under my boots. I slipped once and caught myself on a tree, bark tearing at my glove. My heart raced harder than the fall deserved. I felt exposed, like the ridge behind me had eyes. The forest down here was darker, the air colder. Water pooled in low spots, reflecting the gray sky. My boots soaked through. My socks followed. I kept walking, telling myself warmth would come back with movement. The sounds returned. Not constant, but enough to notice. Branches snapping softly, leaves shifting. Always behind me, always just out of view. I did not turn around anymore. I focused on the ground ahead, on keeping my pace even. The trail disappeared without warning. One moment it was there, a thin line through the leaves, and the next it was gone, swallowed by brush. I stopped and looked around, heart pounding. No markers, no clear path, just forest in every direction. I walked in a small circle, trying to find where it picked up again. I could not. Panic crept in slowly, like cold. I told myself to stay calm, to think clearly. I chose a direction and moved carefully, hoping to intersect the trail again. The ground sloped downward, so I followed it. My breathing came fast now. My hands shook. Then I heard footsteps clearly. Heavy, measured, not rushed. They stopped when I stopped. That was the moment fear became something solid, something real. I moved again, faster this time, pushing through brush, not caring about noise. The footsteps followed, closing distance. I could feel it. Presence behind me, patient and steady. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt weak. I tripped over a hidden root and went down hard, pain flashing through my ankle. I screamed without meaning to, the sound tearing out of me. I lay there for a second, expecting hands, weight, something. Nothing came. I got up, limping badly, and kept moving. The pain was sharp and deep. My foot barely held weight. The forest thinned ahead, light brighter. I pushed toward it every step a fight. I broke out onto a wide gravel service road, cut through the forest like a scar. I stumbled onto it and kept going, not stopping until I reached a bend where I could see both directions clearly. I turned around then. There was no one there, just trees, still and silent, lining the road. I stayed on that road for hours, walking until I found a maintenance building and then a real paved road beyond it. A ranger truck eventually passed. Help came after that. My ankle was badly sprained. I was dehydrated, cold, exhausted. Later, I learned that the trail I chose had been unofficially closed for years. Storm damage, erosion, reports of vandalism. Trail markers removed, signs taken down, people getting lost. I had missed the closure notice because it was not posted anywhere near the trailhead. What followed me I never saw. I do not know if it was a person who did not want company or someone who enjoyed the isolation for darker reasons. What I know is how it felt to be watched without being seen, to realize too late that someone else had control of the situation. I went into the woods thinking nature was the only risk. I came out knowing that the most dangerous thing on that trail walked on two legs, breathed quietly, and knew the forest better than I ever could. I went out for a long hike on a trail I had never done before, deep in a national forest that sat far from towns and cell service. The plan was simple: park early, hike in, eat lunch at a ridge, and hike back before dark. I had done this kind of thing many times. I trusted my legs, my map, and my sense of direction more than I should have. The trailhead looked normal enough. A dirt lot, a wooden sign with faded letters, and a thin path leading into thick trees. The air was cold but clean, and everything smelled like wet soil and pine. The forest was quiet in that heavy way, not peaceful, just still. No wind, no birds. I noticed it but did not think much of it. I locked my car and started walking. The first few miles felt easy. The ground was soft and dark from recent rain. My boots made a dull sound with every step. The trees grew close together, tall and straight, blocking most of the sky. The trail was narrow but clear. Every so often I saw old boot prints and broken branches, signs that other people had been there recently. That made me feel calm. I was not as alone as it felt. As the trail climbed higher, it grew thinner and rougher. Roots crossed the path like thick ropes. Rocks stuck out at bad angles. I had to slow down and watch my footing. My breathing grew heavier. Sweat built under my jacket even though the air stayed cold. I stopped once to drink water and look at my map. The ridge was still far ahead, but everything matched up. I folded the map and kept moving. After another hour, the trail split. There was no sign, just two narrow paths, both worn down enough to look real. I stood there longer than I should have. I checked my map again, turning it in my hands, trying to match the land around me to the lines on the paper. The forest looked the same in every direction. Trees, rocks, shadows. I chose the path that seemed to climb more, thinking it would lead toward the ridge. That choice followed me for the rest of the day. The path I took slowly faded. It did not stop all at once. It just became harder to see. Grass grew higher, Fallen leaves covered the ground. I had to push branches aside. I told myself that trails change, that maps are old, that I would reconnect soon. Still, I marked trees with small scratches from my knife as I went, just in case. The forest grew darker even though the sun was still high. The trees became thicker, their branches blocking more light. The air felt colder and heavier. I started to notice sounds then. Not clear sounds, just movement. Leaves shifting, twigs snapping. Always behind me or off to the side. Never close enough to see. I kept walking. At some point, the ground flattened and dipped into a wide basin. The soil there was muddy, torn up by deep prints. At first I thought they were from deer or elk. Then I saw the shape clearly. Large round marks with claw lines at the front. Mountain lion tracks, fresh ones. The edges were sharp and wet. My stomach tightened. I stood very still and listened. The forest did not answer. No wind, no birds, no movement that I could place. Just my own breathing, loud and fast in my ears. I looked around slowly, forcing myself not to panic. I knew mountain lions were real threats, not stories. They watched. They waited. I backed away from the tracks and changed direction, moving uphill toward thicker ground. I kept my eyes up, scanning trees and rocks. Every shadow looked wrong. Every branch felt like a shape that did not belong. I could not shake the feeling that I was being measured. Time stretched out. I walked longer than I planned, watching the light shift through the trees. The sun moved lower, turning the forest orange and gold in broken patches. I tried to find my marked trees but could not. Everything looked the same again. My phone had no signal. My map felt useless. Then I heard it clearly. A deep, rough sound, low and short, not far away, came from behind me. My body reacted before my mind did. My heart slammed hard against my ribs. My legs went weak. I did not run. I knew better than that. I stood tall, raised my arms, and made myself look bigger. I turned slowly, scanning the trees. I never saw the animal. I only felt it. The pressure of something watching, focused and patient. The sound came again, closer this time. Leaves moved low to the ground. I stepped backward, keeping my eyes wide, my breathing slow. I moved uphill again, one careful step at a time. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. I did not know. The sound stopped. The forest stayed tense. I kept moving until my legs burned and my lungs ached. Finally, the ground changed. Rocks gave way to open slope. The trees thinned. I reached a narrow ridge just as the sun dropped behind the mountains. From the ridge, I saw the truth of my mistake. The parking lot sat far away in the wrong direction, separated by steep valleys and dense forest. There was no way back before dark. I felt cold settle into my bones. I knew I would have to spend the night. I found a shallow rock shelf and made a small shelter with branches. I ate slowly, saving what food I had. The forest grew dark fast. The silence returned, heavier than before. Every sound felt sharp. I kept my back to the rock and my eyes open as long as I could. Sometime in the night, I heard movement again. Slow steps, soft and controlled. I did not move. I barely breathed. The sound circled, staying just out of sight. I smelled something sharp and wild on the air. I knew then that the animal had not left. It was waiting for weakness. I stayed awake until my body shook from cold and fear. When morning finally came, the light felt thin and weak, but it was enough. The sounds were gone. The forest felt empty again. I moved fast but careful, sticking to open ground, following the ridge down until I found a real trail. By midday, I reached the parking lot. My car sat alone, covered in dust. I locked myself inside and did not move for a long time. I made it home that night. I cleaned my boots and packed my gear away. I still hike, but never alone now, and never without knowing exactly where I am. The forest does not need to chase you to remind you how small you are. It only needs to wait.